I'm Carrie Mahoney from the ARC of Massachusetts, and it is my pleasure to partner with the Massachusetts Sibling Support Network. And over the course of a year, we'll be putting together 4 different webinars. And sibling relationships, sibling support is just so important because you are the longest living relative for your brother or sister with a disability. And so your role is just incredibly important. So I'm just going to let Emily take it away and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Carrie. So I'm sure you all know, Carrie is from the ARC, and I'm the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Sibling Support Network. I'm really thrilled to be here. And there are 3 affiliates from the MSSN that are going to be our sibling panelists. So that's pretty exciting. I'd like to tell you a little bit about the Massachusetts Sibling Support Network. And then I'd love for our panelists to introduce themselves. So the Massachusetts Sibling Support Network has a 3-fold mission. The first part is to provide welcoming communities to siblings of people with disabilities. The second part is to provide education around sibling-related issues. And the third part is to increase the range of sibling services that are available throughout the state. And as you know, the focus of today is going to be on future planning, looking ahead, looking back, some reflections on what people have experienced in terms of future planning in their family, and some recommendations they have for the attendees in this webinar. So I'm not sure if we have I see we have Hillary and Joe. I don't see our third panelist yet. But why don't we start? Oh, yep, I do see all 3. Wonderful. So we have Hillary Dunstanich, Joe Cicero, and Monica Gordillo, each of whom is an adult sibling and is also very involved in the Massachusetts sibling community. So it would be wonderful, panelists, if you would introduce yourselves, tell a little bit about your background, right? Maybe what kind of work you do. And then what we'll do is I'll start asking some questions that you can all respond to. At the end of this webinar, there will be a time for questions. We're going to leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. And you should feel free to put them in the chat box as well. Oh, that's right. One other thing, Carrie, that we had asked, we wanted to know if people would introduce themselves in the chat box. So, Hillary, would you like to start?
Sure. So, so are you looking for just about us, or about just a brief thing of us and a brief thing of our sibling, or?
Sure. Yeah, that would be perfect.
All right. Sure. I just wanted. I kind of zoned out for a minute. Wanted to make sure I got it. So.
Sure, because the questions I'm going to be asking will be building on your introduction. So,
of course. Okay.
It's good to hear about the diagnosis of your brother and
sure.
Like that.
Okay, so I'll just be brief. So I'm Hillary. I guess I'll start with my brother. He's older, much older. He's 42 and is a few years older than me. And he was born with Angelman Syndrome, which is a relatively rare syndrome. So a lot of people haven't heard of it, doesn't matter. But due to the Angelman Syndrome, some of the things that come from that are he has a severe or profound, kind of hard to tell, intellectual disability. So he's a pretty impacted guy in that way. He requires assistance with pretty much, most personal care and ADL type things. He can walk some with assistance. He's nonverbal, but, really is a super social guy. And, it's frustrating at times how, overlooked he can be because, he's nonverbal and communicates in different ways. But he's really social and loves engaging with the people that, he has relationships with for, throughout his life. so that's Chris. He lives with my parents. We're big family, all in Massachusetts. So he does still live with my parents. We tried a group home briefly. It was not the best fit. And yeah, so that's Chris. And I'm a, by my profession is I'm a lawyer. I work at a nonprofit in Boston called the Disability Law Center. So I'm basically like a disability rights lawyer. So it doesn't really take a genius to put together that he clearly has had an impact on my life in the type of work that I've gone into. So I, think I'm married. We have another sister. She's the oldest, then Chris, then me, I'm the youngest. So that's the basics.
Hillary, let's not forget you're the co-board president of the
true.
Massachusetts Sibling Support Network.
That is true. Yes.
Thanks. Thank you so much. Joe, would you introduce yourself as well?
I think you're muted.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. You'd think I would have figured Zoom out by now. Yeah, so my name's Joe. I'm the treasurer at the MSSN. Been there for about 6 or 7 years now, Emily, is that right?
Mm-hmm.
And professionally, my background is in consulting and finance. So, I met Emily through a mutual connection in Boston, and thought that just my background would serve the organization well. In terms of my experience, my sister, Katie, she's 2 years older than me. She just turned 32, actually about a week ago. She, outlived her initial life expectancy by probably 3 or 4 times at this point. She has cerebral palsy, never walked or spoke a word in her life. She lives at home with my parents. I'm excited to kind of dig into the issues we're discussing here. I've never done one of these panels before, so excited to get started.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe.
Thanks.
And Monica, would you introduce yourself?
Sure. I've also never done one of these before, so we'll see how it goes. My name is Monica. I am originally from California, so I'm very far from home, and I'm always cold in Boston. I have a younger brother. I think he's 10 years younger. He's 18 years old. And he has autism, although he identifies more with like a high functioning type of autism, or barely identifies with the autism label now. And I'm a doctoral student at Boston University. I'm sure this is not unique to siblings of individuals with disability, but I do both clinical work and research with individuals with autism. Clinical work with testing, diagnostic testing for autism and also developmental disabilities in general, and research with adult siblings of adults with disabilities.
Thank you. And also, it's so interesting because you're also modest. And that's actually a trait of adult siblings, that they tend to be very modest, very generous, and kind people. But one thing, Monica, I'd like to point out is that you've done some really important research on autism in the Latino community. So if there's an opportunity to share any of that, then please feel free to.
Absolutely.
So the first question I have, and perhaps the best way to orchestrate this, is just to go in order of the introduction. So first Hillary can respond, and then Joe can respond, and then Monica can respond. So my first question for you is, if you can tell us about your relationship with your brother or sister with disabilities and how that relationship has changed over time. And it's okay to talk about the positives and the negatives.
Okay, so going first is like sometimes a little tough on these, but all right, I'll jump right into it. Chris, my brother's name is Chris. I've always been very involved in his life and very close to him in his ways. But, you know, obviously when I was younger, our relationship was a bit different than it is now. Not that, you know, he could talk and now he doesn't talk, but just in terms of maybe the role that I played with him growing up, I was definitely just his sister and kind of more of like the playmate. My sister and I were really fortunate that, well, for two things, that my parents were able to somehow, I don't know how they did it, not really have us in caretaking roles at younger ages. And, you know, sometimes siblings are put in those positions, even with parents with the best of intentions. So somehow we managed to not be put in those. And I think that, you know, was really healthy when that can happen. But, you know, it doesn't mean we're brother and sister. It doesn't mean I didn't not like him sometimes and, you know, find things he was doing annoying. Chris has some, I guess he would have like the label of like can have aggressive behaviors on him, but can have some aggressive behaviors. But I mean, just working in the field, I think it's actually like kind of silly that that label is put on him in comparison to some of the things. But he will like reach and grab if he wants attention, and he's a really strong guy, so he doesn't really know his strength. But what that would look like sometimes when we were younger is, you know, I would have scratches like up and down my arms if he would grab and like, you know, scrape my arm, which, you know, is a little hard to explain to your friends sometimes. And, you know, he'd pull my hair. One time he pulled so hard that he pulled out like a piece of my scalp on the bottom. I was really young, so I don't really remember it, but I know some of these things were really hard for my parents to kind of watch happening and worrying about how that was impacting me and my sister. So obviously there were times that were not always rosy. As a teenager, as much as I loved Chris, most teenagers can get pretty self-conscious about different things. So I think it's a pretty normal experience to go through that time of maybe not wanting him around as much because he acted quote unquote different. And I didn't have any friends that, I grew up in a small town in Massachusetts. I didn't have any friends that had, you know, anybody like Chris in their lives. So I just wanted to fit in. And I played an example, I played a lot of sports. And I remember, you know, in middle school, I just have a distinct memory of playing basketball and being at the foul line, taking a foul shot when, you know, it's supposed to be like quiet sort of then. And, you know, my brother was there and he was like vocalizing really, really loudly and everybody was staring at him. And I remember being very embarrassed at that time, which, you know, I look back now and I'm like, embarrassed of myself for being embarrassed and ashamed of that. But at the same time, I think that's a normal thing for a teenager to feel. So I'm just saying all that to say, like, I'm not going to sit here and say every moment with Chris as my sibling was perfect. It certainly wasn't. With all that said, I love my parents, I love my sister, I love my husband, but Chris is like the most important person in the world to me. And now, you know, we're close. In non-COVID times, I would see him at least once a week and help with care at this point. He needs that. Do different activities together out in the community. Social guy, likes to be out. So I'm not, at this point, I don't have like a legal role in his life. I think we might talk about that later, but I don't have, you know, I'm not his guardian or anything like that. But I do have more of a caretaking role now. And, you know, just a quick point that I think is important for any of us to kind of think through is like, you know, we can think about what the impact of COVID has been, of course, on our loved ones with disabilities and how that's impacted their services and different things like that. But in the sibling world, I think it's really important to think about how that's impacted our relationships with our siblings. And like, I can't pick up the phone and call Chris. He doesn't talk, and I can't see him the way that I used to. And part of communicating with Chris is touching, like hugging and all of those types of things. And I can't do that, and I can't help my parents with care in the same way. And the feelings of like guilt and just kind of heartbreak around that, I think, are things that aren't unique to me in the sibling community during COVID, but are an important, you know, part to think about our relationships with our brothers and sisters. So that's all.
Thank you, Hillary. And that's a great point that you brought up about the impact of COVID as well. Joe, would you respond to the same question, which is tell us about your relationship with your sister with disabilities and how that relationship has changed over time?
Yeah, for sure. So kind of similar to Hillary, growing up, you know, Katie was at certain functions. You know, right now she's, you know, she's supported by a ventilator, so she's not able to go out and about as much. But in, you know, elementary, middle, high school, you know, she would come to games, and we actually went to the same elementary school. So there were certain classes where, like a music class, for example, where Katie would come, and that was definitely a unique experience. In that, you know, she had an aide who, you know, who would, you know, assist her and wheel her into class. And, you know, we would have to, from a young age, kind of explain, you know, that's our sister, you know, she has a disability, et cetera. And that was something that, yeah, I think was kind of interesting to grow up with, and an interesting conversation to have. You know, so, but with time we got used to it. I would say now, as she's become kind of more, again, dependent on a ventilator and less, you know, less likely to leave the house. You know, I definitely, and also you know, I generally live in San Francisco. She lives with my parents in Rochester, New York. So, you know, by virtue of living across the country, don't see her a ton, but we're actually back on the East Coast because of COVID. And I've been staying at my other sister's house, just to kind of avoid any sort of risk there, because she's obviously the definition of high risk. And then, you know, when we do kind of pop in and say hi to her and try to get a smile out of her, you know, we're, you know, 10 feet away wearing a mask. You know, she can't necessarily see our facial expressions, or maybe not even recognize us. You know, all growing up, whenever I would kind of, you know, go into her room to try to get a smile out of her. If I was wearing a hat, she wouldn't recognize me. So the mask doesn't necessarily help with that either. But yeah, in terms of how my relationship has evolved, you know, I would say because she's always been non-mobile or non-verbal, she's kind of always been like my baby sister, despite being older. So it's always been like, you know, doing anything to cheer her up or to get a laugh out of her. And we were helping with care tanking from a pretty early age with my parents. Though just given her condition now, that's not possible. And then in terms of future planning, you know, it's kind of just started to get to the point where, you know, we're having discussions around discussing finances and those things, which is a tricky subject for sure. And one that we, you know, don't necessarily have a very solid plan around. So, you know, this topic is definitely very, very top of mind and relevant for me and what my family is kind of thinking about now.
Thank you. Thanks, Joe. And Monica, I'll ask you the same question. Tell us about your relationship with your brother and how that relationship has changed over time.
Sure. So I feel like I have a good relationship with my brother, but it looks different than a lot of like sibling relationships that I've observed, in that we need very little contact and interaction for me to think it's actually a great relationship. as when he was much younger, his main way of reaching out to me was he would have favorite TV shows and would just kind of like hold my head so that I would always be watching the TV show. And that was him letting me know that he wanted to share that show with me. And as he got older and acquired a lot more skills, I think it was a lot of the same things, just maybe not holding my head in front of the TV, but definitely like wanting me to watch a TV show or wanting me to watch a movie that he really liked. Very, very little talking or conversations, but that was just our thing. And it kind of lended itself well to me traveling across the country, where right now what we mostly do is just recommend TV shows to each other. I follow him on Instagram. He follows me on Instagram, and we'll just share things that we find funny. And that's the majority of our interaction. I think other than that, my parents are dealing a lot with, he's kind of, I guess in their views, outgrown the autism label. He's so high functioning that he doesn't have any services, and he is struggling a bit. So he will have like a teenager tantrums that look a lot like he did when he was 2 years old, but just more mature, I guess. And so my parents will contact me whenever he's very upset at them about something and have me talk him down. And so I guess other than our more like spontaneous interactions, that's mainly how I interact with them.
All right, thank you, Monica. I just want this actually, I did share some questions with the panelists ahead of time, and this was not a question on the list, but I don't think it will throw you off. I'd love to hear about how your choice of a romantic partner was impacted by your brother or sister with a disability. Hillary, would you mind talking a little bit about that?
Sure. And before I do that, I'm not stalling, I have no problem talking about it, but I did just something that's like really great. I just wanted to kind of observe for a minute, is I'm just really happy to see so many adult siblings participating in this, that a lot of time, not that it's wonderful to have, you know, a 25-year-old adult siblings participating in things. We don't always have, in the work that we do for MSSM, we don't always have, you know, I'm 39, and sometimes I'm the oldest sibling participating in the stuff. So it's just really nice to see people that might be, you know, a couple of years older than me part of it too. So I just wanted to kind of say that it's a really nice thing to see, and to just acknowledge that, you know, I don't know any of you really, but the experience of kind of the whole growing up thing, I think that, you know, I don't know what your experiences were, but I was right on the edge of the, my brother was born in 1978, and I was kind of right on the edge of the norm being that a person with his level of needs would go to an institution. And he didn't, but I do remember being told, or I was told that, you know, when he was like 4 or 5 and my parents, you know, God forbid, asked the school district for some, you know, amount of service or something, the response to them was, well, you have 2 other children. It might be time for you to start thinking about sending him to Rentham Developmental Center, which is one of the large institutions in Mass. So I don't have, you know, like real direct life experience with any of those issues of really living apart as a young child, but I just kind of want to acknowledge that some people might have those, and that's a different set of discussions and questions. My brother did go to residential school because of, you know, just his high level of needs and some issues at home. So he didn't live with us starting when he was 14 till 22. He was at residential school, which, you know, I didn't really get into in the other conversation or question before this, but if people do want to talk about any of the kind of experiences of living apart from your sibling growing up, I mean, I can identify with those to an extent. I was about 11 or 12 when he didn't live with us anymore. He did come home on the weekends and all of that, but that added another level to some of the, I don't know, sibling feelings and kind of like living two different lives, right? I mean, I had friends that didn't even know that my brother existed because he lived at a residential school. So anyways, I just kind of want to acknowledge some of that given the like diverse crowd that we have, which is awesome. Anyways, all right, so moving on to romantic partner. Sure. I think it's very common for siblings. All the research shows, we use our, for good or bad, use our brother or sister with disability as like a boyfriend or girlfriend or, romantic partner test, right? Like they have to be able to accept what our relationship with our love, with our brother or sister is and all of that. And that I certainly fall into that category. And without getting into the nitty gritty of my personal life, I got married, I guess, a little bit later in life. And, I think some of that really was due to other relationships kind of reaching very serious points, and it just kind of really reaching that point of like, okay, you're saying the right things, but like, you don't really get it. You don't really get my life. And you don't get that I'm not moving to New York or whatever for my life. Like this is what I'm doing. I'm staying here with my brother. So, I definitely had those experiences. And I think that's not uncommon. So, but my husband now and is to say that he's like wonderful with my brother and wonderfully understanding is an understatement.
So you picked the right person. He was worth the wait. And Joe, how about you? Can you tell us a little bit about how growing up with Katie might have impacted your choice of romantic partner?
Yeah, I actually wasn't familiar with the research that indicated that's kind of the litmus test, but it totally makes sense. And I definitely ran my girlfriend Kelsey through the battery of tests in introducing her to Katie, and she passed with flying colors. So yeah, it's something I never really thought of, and I think it's one of those things that a relationship is getting serious when you start to kind of introduce the topic, right? And kind of talk through some of those topics that are a bit more difficult. It's definitely not something I find that I bring up, the first, second, or 10th time I meet someone. It's something as I get to know them that comes up. And I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's me not looking for sympathy from someone else or more building a trust factor. But I do find that it's something that I'm not necessarily immediately upfront about, which is interesting.
Mm-hmm. Very, indeed. Thank you, Joe. And Monica, how about you? How has growing up with your brother impacted your choice of romantic partner?
I think for me, I was just very upfront. I don't know if this was right at the beginning of our relationship, but definitely along the way and early in our relationship, I was very upfront about what he needed to do and be okay with. Like when we visited California, I think before the first time I let him know that my brother comes across as very disinterested, and he'll say hi to you and then just go back to his phone. And that doesn't mean that that my partner gets to stop trying to get to know him and stop trying to reach out to him in different ways. And then as my brother was applying to colleges, I think like even a year before he started applying, I had the conversation with my now fiance that if he wants to apply to colleges in Boston, he's going to be living with us, and he just needed to come first. And I wouldn't necessarily be the happiest about that, because he frustrates me. My brother frustrates me quite a few times. He moves so slowly, and I need to move faster. But I needed to prioritize him, my brother, and so that was kind of like it's not up for negotiation, and he was okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Thank you. The next question has to do with family culture around disability. A lot of times when we think about culture, we think about race and ethnicity, but culture also has to do with values that families have, how families communicate. And my question is, can you describe your family's culture around disability? For example, does your family talk openly about disability? Are there certain family members that you don't talk about disability with? And is disability viewed as negative or positive or both? So, Hillary, I know
Yeah.
it's hard when you're always going first answering these
That's
questions.
okay.
I appreciate
No. So for this, I would say, again, given my age, my brother's age, we are kind of like right at that point in that general time period where, I don't know, just like the idea of disability and families, the idea of inclusion, like things just started to change, I think, a little bit around my time between, passage of the individuals, IDEA, the special ed laws, and, just a lot of things around that. I mean, even though the ADA wasn't passed until like 1990, but still,
Boy,
I think
we jump in for a second, Hillary. So
yeah,
it's really helpful if when you use acronyms, just to say what the word is.
yeah, that's why I just jumped to special ed law.
Okay.
But
ADA is
American with Disabilities Act, right? Yeah. But just kind of these general ideas of people with disabilities were like more part of our society. Obviously, we still have like a long way to go, but I think people that are younger than me have a different experience, because oftentimes, because disability has been even more included and part of it, and people older than me have a different experience. I think I'm kind of right when it started to shift a little bit. As a general society, of course, every family's different and all of that. But in our family, yeah, I mean, we're a typical family in some ways, of that we don't necessarily talk about our emotions very much, or there are things like that with each other. But when it comes to things about Chris, we are pretty open, honest, discussing it. I think, there's full acceptance of Chris and all of that within our like immediate family. We have a very large extended family of whom, people are accepting and stuff, but, I'm too young to remember it. But I do know, with my grandparents, there was a learning curve, maybe, to put it kindly, of, work that my parents had to do with them. It's a different generation. So, but that, I mean, my memories of my grandparents with my brother are beautiful and lovely, and they loved him and they were some of his favorite people. But of course, when he was born in 1978, there was some different types of discussions going on in the world. I think what's really nice to see is I have some younger-ish cousins that are, kind of like just starting college age, that type. Between my younger-ish cousins and then my niece and nephew, who are 11 now, they're twins, seeing like their relationship with my brother and how, open and accepting, and he's just, part of their lives in a certain way. So, in that way, I think we're pretty fortunate to have kind of a very open and accepting family. Both of my parents, also my mom, when I was younger, went back to school to get her master's as a licensed mental health clinician, and she worked with people with intellectual disabilities. And my dad was in like federal law enforcement, but when he retired, volunteered in a lot of disability related ways. So it just was kind of ingrained in our family. So.
Thank you, Hillary. And Joe, how about you? What kind of family culture did you grow up with around disability?
Yeah, and Hillary, just to call out, I feel like going second following you is just as much pressure as going first, because it's a very high bar to cross.
No, I just talk too much.
I find myself wondering how I'm going to follow that up. But we were and continue to be very accepting and open. And I think kind of similar to what Hillary was saying, yet we're not necessarily a family that discusses our personal feelings or issues very much. But when it comes to Katie, I think that's something that we've always been very open and forthcoming about. I would say we definitely view the situation that we've dealt with as one that's kind of given us a certain appreciation for how good we each have it, and it definitely give us a certain strength, I think, to deal with adversity. But yeah, and across my extended family, they've all kind of bought in for sure. I have one aunt who has become a pretty strong advocate for disability rights. Was actually within the last 5 years, I believe, arrested for protesting a certain issue. I can't necessarily remember back to when we were really young and how my family and my extended family kind of initially reacted to kind of Katie coming into our lives. But I know all I can remember is positivity and support across the board.
Nice, thanks. And Monica, if you could respond to the same question, that would be great, describing your family's culture around disability. And this also might be an opportunity if there is or any kind of short data points on this culture around disability in the Latino community, that would be great to hear too.
Yeah, and it does intersect quite a bit with my own personal response. In that when my brother was diagnosed and through most of his childhood, some of his teenage years, my family very much identified with, like, we're an autism family, and tried to do a lot of volunteer work in different autism organizations, and basically anything that we did outside of work or school had something to do with autism. So even my parents have really started investing a lot of time in their church, and they chose that church because it was an autism friendly church. And it's just those kinds of services or organizations is where they enjoy spending their time. And I think as my brother got older, and something about being a teenager, having some social awareness and knowing that he has autism, I think there's a little bit of embarrassment or shame around the diagnosis that he knows he carries. So he identifies with it less so now, or at least isn't vocal about it. And I think as a family, we tried to be respectful and not, we've talked about autism a lot less now as a family, although my parents call me all the time and we talk about autism. And kind of like what everybody else had said, we don't really talk about our feelings and stuff like that. And I think my brother would benefit in having more of these conversations, even though they're tough for him. But we just don't. And I almost feel like there's a little bit of extra embarrassment there for me, just because, I'm working clinical psychology. My job is to make people talk about their feelings. But the intersection there with the Latino community, my mom works at, she's a kindergarten teacher in a predominantly immigrant Latino community, where it's not even that they don't talk about autism in the family because it's hard or there's feelings there. It's that there's just a lot more of wanting to distance oneself from even the autism label. that's where it gets tough to even do things like recruit for autism studies when families don't really want to identify with that word. So it's tough, and she does a lot of work with trying to help moms if she is seeing some kind of developmental red flags, helping moms understand and be a little bit more accepting of what an evaluation could bring.
Thank you. I want to spend the next part of the webinar really talking and thinking about future planning. So Hillary, my question for you is, what steps, if any, has your family taken around future planning?
Yeah, you know, I think we've taken a lot of what I would call like the brick and mortar steps that, you know, so Chris is someone who really does require having a court-appointed guardian. So, you know, that is already in place. It is, my parents are in that role. And, you know, in the future, the expectation, which my sister and I are, you know, we've talked about it with my parents and everything, is that we will serve in that role in the future as his co-guardians. You know, Chris has special needs trust set up for him, which, you know, like many families, we're not multimillionaires, so, you know, it's kind of the whole unfunded trust with life insurance money type of situation, which is common for many families. And, you know, those types of documents, like the legal documents, are in place. My parents are reasonably, you know, sophisticated in making sure, you know, his government benefit, like his SSI, SSTI, you know, he's eligible for Medicaid and Medicare at this point. You know, all of those very important things will need to be in the future. So that stuff is great. What is challenging, or is that the next question, talking about our challenges? Maybe I'm jumping ahead.
Actually, it's fine. If you want to combine those two questions. Yeah, the
Okay.
next question has been challenges your family has encountered with
Okay.
future
All right. I'll just, because ours, I'd say there's a couple major challenges. One is they're interrelated. Chris has people with Angelman syndrome, like just because of Angelman syndrome, it doesn't impact their expected lifespan, right? So he has a normal life expectancy. He has other things going on with him that, you know, are serious medical things, but, you know, so we have to plan for his full life. With that said, he has changing or increasing needs that are some things related, unfortunately, to the Angelman syndrome. There's these, I don't need to get into details, but some healthcare challenges that have arisen over the last few years that have really very much impacted his quality of life, and really my parents as caretakers, their quality of life, because he just requires that much more hands-on care and like constant monitoring and things of that nature. And you kind of combine that with the lack of, I mean, even in Massachusetts, we have like good services, right? But for him, I don't really know what's going to work for him in the future. From a residential standpoint, he can't live with my parents forever. This is you know, probably the biggest stressor on our family, and the biggest challenge is, what does that look like in the future? You know, if Chris is the middle child and he's 42, so you can kind of guess my parents are not spring chickens. So, you know, that's our major stressor. And Chris lived in a group home briefly, and it just wasn't a good fit. I think we're looking for other options, and really feel that it's important for Chris to remain in his home, in his community. And, you know, sometimes the system isn't particularly always flexible and available the way that families want it to be. So I think that's a major challenge for us. There are we're going to have to work to be creative to come up with things that are going to work for us. Whether Chris lives ultimately with me or my sister is, you know, to be determined. You know, we both work full time, either have kids or planning to have kids. So, you know, it's tricky. And then you add into that, like, kind of the lack of options during COVID time and what that's going to look like in the future. You know, Chris has been without services throughout all of COVID, meaning like his day program was closed, and now even when they've reopened, he can't go back given risk factors of both him and my parents. And now his day program has actually closed. So, you know, what that looks like going forward is a little scary for us too. So I'd say those are kind of our challenges, which are, you know, significant, very significant and stressful. With that said, I don't think that we're particularly unique of families that kind of fall in this general population. I think we're kind of in these struggles together.
Mm-hmm. And approaching it creatively, kind of one day at a time, sounds like. Joe, how about you? What steps has your family taken toward future planning, and any challenges your family has encountered with future planning?
Yeah, so, you know, in recent years, we've definitely started on the financial side of things, you know, kind of making sure we're in a good spot. You know, I think one of the things that we're dealing with is, you know, 10, 15 years ago, I don't know that any of us would have really expected Katie to still be here. So, you know, the discussion of taking over for my parents was never really had. And they are getting older. You know, my dad's about to be 70 next year, and my mom's going to be 60. And my mom is her primary caretaker. You know, it's either my mom taking care of her or a combination of my mom and a nurse. So, you know, that's a conversation we're going to have. You know, I think it's a tough one because her case is such a specialized one, right? Where my mom's able to do it because she's been doing it for 32 years now. But the nurses who take care of her are somewhat, you know, specialized in taking care of, you know, high-risk kids, basically. Obviously something that none of us are remotely qualified to do. So, you know, that's a discussion we have to have for sure. And yeah, it's kind of a tough thing to think about, honestly, and one a topic that we really haven't discussed, frankly.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thanks. And Monica, you're also, I mean, everybody has these kind of universal experiences, like you're at everyone's in a different stage with future planning, but I also want to comment that your brother has what we often refer to as invisible disabilities. So what steps has your family taken toward future planning, and what challenges has your family encountered?
So I guess before I answer that, it might be helpful to give a little bit more context to this. Another line of research that I do is within my lab, we've developed a program for adult siblings of adults with autism. And the whole point of the program is to help siblings learn how to get involved and eventually take over with future planning for the adult siblings with autism. So having laid out that context, I have done very little future planning with my family, and I think my family's done very little future planning. And I think part of that is when my brother was younger, plans for the future were drawn like if this happens, this is what should happen. And it was so difficult to accurately predict what my brother was going to look like a year from now that making those plans just didn't, like, it kind of went out the window at some point. So no long-term future planning. In terms of short-term future planning, again, he just started college. And my parents and I are at a bit of a disagreement, a big disagreement on my parents want to wait and see how he fares. I don't. I think he needs services. I think he needs extra support. And I worry about how he's going to do in college if he doesn't have those in place already. And I know the system, and I know that if he starts having problems and decides to start the process of getting some assessments done, like diagnoses and like a formal evaluation, and then have accommodations put into place, that could take like a year. So that's what worries me, and that's where my parents and I are at a bit of a standstill. But again, going back to the research, I think doing that project was like the best thing I could have done, because I realized how it seems like all siblings have maybe not those exact questions or concerns, but it doesn't really matter what age or what the exact situation is. I feel like I've definitely started feeling like I'm not alone, that all siblings seem to be like, am I late in the game in doing future planning or learning about it? Am I too early? Am I being too type A and should just like relax about it? Like, do I know anything? Do I know a lot? It's been great hearing how common all of those thoughts and worries are.
Mm-hmm. Would you, are you able to enter in the chat box a link to the research you've done on siblings and future planning, or how people can get more information?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And kind of taking up where Monica left off with the difference between parents and siblings, the way they approach future planning, what research has shown is that parents and siblings do approach future planning differently. Typically, adult siblings want to allow their brother or sister with disabilities to take more risks. So Hillary, my question for you is, has this happened in your family? Have parents and adult siblings approached future planning differently?
I would say maybe yes, in the way that I think my sister and I would probably want to move some things along a little faster. And like many parents, I don't think mine are unique in this way. You know, I don't know the nice way to say it, maybe, you know, a little denial of, you know, their own declining like physical, you know, prowess. Chris requires a lot of physical care, and he's not a little lightweight and all of that. So it's physically demanding, which obviously makes us worry about our parents quite a bit. So I would say we differ in that sense of kind of wanting to move things along maybe a little bit quicker to address in-home supports or other things. With that said, I think they're taking a lot of the steps that they can, and that our system doesn't make it easy. But otherwise, Chris, you know, I'm very familiar, you know, with the research of like siblings are, you know, kind of looking to allow their brothers or sisters more opportunities for risk, more independence. And I work in the disability rights field. I'm very much in favor of looking at people's competencies and skills and abilities and putting that first. With that said, my brother has very severe disabilities, and he has very significant risk factors related to that. So I don't think my parents and I are on particularly different fields, wavelengths as far as some of that goes. And I don't think that has anything to do with either of us being like limited in what we're thinking about for Chris. We want him to be a part of his community and to be able to go out and about and do things with supports. That's really important to us, but there has to be systems to support that. So I don't think that we've really conflicted in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I just would like to ask the audience at this point, if you have questions about future planning, please put them in the chat box. And Joe, let's go to you. As I said, parents and adult siblings sometimes approach future planning differently. Has this happened in your family?
You know, I don't really think it has. I think what's really played out in my family is, again, you know, Katie has been my mom's primary focus, again, for all of Katie's life, the last 32 years. So I think our family's approach has kind of been defer to mom, because she's just built up so much expertise at this point. You know, she's not, you know, she doesn't have the certifications or education of a nurse, but she certainly has, you know, all the experience, right? And, you know, so that's definitely, and the same goes for kind of the administrative tasks of, you know, managing Katie's finances and future planning. So for better or for worse, I think that's been kind of our family's approach is, you know, deferred mom. But that being said, again, kind of along the lines of what Hillary was saying, no one's really acknowledged the fact that, you know, my parents are getting older and they're not going to be around forever. And, you know, God willing, Katie will continue to kind of chug along. So, you know, so that's again, that's kind of a tough conversation to have, but one that is certainly needs to be had soon.
Mm-hmm. They're hard conversations.
Yeah.
Monica, how about you? You sort of touched on this, that parents and adult siblings sometimes approach future planning differently. Aside from what you already shared with us, has this happened in your family?
I think it's mainly this issue that's come up in different ways, but where I think he would benefit from having services now and even planning for services in the future, again, short term, but having those services. And my approach to that has just been to my parents disagreeing with that, has just been to maybe be over prepared on my end. And if my parents want my advice, it's already there and ready to go. Like, it should my parents think, you know, it's a good idea, maybe you should be tested again. I have the names of 2 places that he could go to, and I know that they would be good quality places and stuff like that, where I'm not going to butt in too much, but every now and then I'll drop a line about, I think it would be a good idea, to my parents, and then just being ready if they need it.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, I want to mention that the Mass Sibling Support Network does provide a workshop or presentation called Future Planning is a Family Affair. This presentation really goes into detail about different aspects of future planning, guardianship, all kind of the technical parts of future planning, as well as how to have difficult conversations within families. It looks like Margaret wrote in the chat box, COVID made me and my sibs acutely aware that we have no plan if for some reason I don't outlive my brother, or for that matter, what to do when we are all in our 80s. Does anyone on the panel want to respond to that?
2 thoughts came to mind. I mean, I think in many ways, Margaret, you're like it or not, right? You're kind of what's the word? Why am I not trendsetter? You're the
yes.
Your first
yes.
one's dealing with it. I've been blanking on the word, but of this why can't I think of the word? You know, you're of the generation where, you know, now our brothers and sisters, like, many live longer than they've ever lived before, right? I mean, for many reasons, and are living in the community more than they ever have before. And I think you're bringing up something that, you know, we're struggling just to get, like, sibling awareness, and sibling support and sibling recognition and bringing siblings together. But what you're bringing up is like the next concern is, okay, that's great, but like our kids or their nieces and nephews or whomever that's going to do it. I mean, I don't have an answer, but I think you're bringing up the next wave of what do we have to consider next. And I do think, I have no idea what your family situation is, but for anybody whose loved one is in Massachusetts and served by our state's Department of Developmental Services, I think they're hearing finally maybe a little bit of concerns from families and people with disabilities about looking at the needs of people who are aging with intellectual and developmental disabilities, that like the same old isn't going to work anymore. Like we need to have some plans for, the 80-year-old, like what are, you're going to send them to a day program. Like they don't want to go to a day program. They want to retire like everybody else. What that's going to look like. So in that sense, I'm slightly optimistic that some of those conversations are more readily happening.
Hillary, I'm also wondering if you would respond to Amy's question. Amy, I want to say I'm so sorry to hear about the losses in your family. It sounds like, she writes, our family future plan was for my brother to live with another brother who lived in the same community. That brother passed away. My mother passed away in the same year. So the biggest challenge has been slogging through the legalities and bureaucracy of being his legal guardian. And that she'd like some help with this. Do you have any thoughts as our resident disability rights attorney?
Well, I guess, it kind of would depend on some of the details of that. Do you kind of mean all of the paper, like, I don't know if you're his representative payee and if you have to deal with his SSI or SSDI and all of that? Is that kind of what you're talking about? Or are you talking about actually obtaining guardianship in Mass, or what?
There was a lot. It took a long time to obtain the guardianship in Mass.
Yeah.
My mom and I had been co-guardians after the other brother got sick. I had to dissolve that before I could even become his sole guardian, which was a surprise to me. And then doing the fast forwarding to doing the accounting, because I am the conservator of his account. I got into some real trouble because although I was honest and forthright and have had tons of documentation, etc., my accounting methods were questioned, and it took me the better part of a year to settle that and cost thousands of dollars in legal fees, which came out of my brother's estate.
Yep.
It broke our hearts, obviously.
Yeah.
So it's come time to do the second accounting, and I am not going to do that again. And so I'm coming up against the courts, and I'm not certain of my rights. I don't have a lot of confidence in the lawyers who had been advising me the first time. But that, taking care of my brother is one thing. Going through the bureaucracy is just a whole nother thing. And I'm just happy to find this group, and those questions I'm sure can't be answered right now, but it's nice to have a place to go, and I'm thrilled with that. Thank you.
Well, Amy, we can, I know you quickly said something of you weren't necessarily maybe thrilled or super confident in the attorneys that helped you the first time around. So between Carrie and I, if we could follow up with you just with like attorney referrals, if you are looking for some that have it, are very experienced in dealing with families with disability as part of it, we can certainly do that.
That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'd like to thank everybody for joining this webinar. Especially thanks to our panelists, Hillary, Joe, and Monica. Thank you to the ARC for being a wonderful collaborative partner. And as Carrie had mentioned, we will be offering a few more webinars in collaboration this year. And I encourage people, if you're not familiar with the Massachusetts Sibling Support Network, to check us out online. And I did put in the chat box the web address. We're a little bit over time, so I wish everybody
Well, Emily, can I just
Yeah.
plug one of the MSSN's like specific programming things going on right now? Just because it sounds like there's a bunch of adult siblings here who are just, enjoying like connecting with people who have similar experiences, and we can serve as resources for each other and all of that. So because of COVID and we can't, have a get together in person and all of that, we've the MSSN has started doing monthly, we just called them sharing spaces, like Zoom get-togethers. Basically, it's just informal discussions, kind of a meetup group, and we've had, I think, some success with those. And if we have more and more success, that's great. And if it ends up that we have so much success that perhaps there's different age group breakdowns, because sometimes issues are different at different points in life. Certainly the MSSN is wants to be flexible and try to meet people's needs in that way too, right? Because like a 25-year-old's needs might be different than 65 when you're trying to deal with some issues. But right now we're just building up this program, this sharing spaces program. I think we've done 2 or 3, Emily, is that right?
Yes, we've done 2.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic to have adult siblings. Thank you for mentioning that, Hillary.
Yeah, I think it's one of like, COVID makes something so hard, but it's one of the things that I think is like a real strength that we can offer to like just provide space for people right now.
Right. And the topics that have come up in the sharing space are a lot of the topics that were raised in today's webinar. Hillary very early on mentioned feelings of guilt. There's a lot of concern and guilt and sharing stories, and it's really a wonderful peer support opportunity. We do have a lot of services at the Mass Sibling Support Network, including a new initiative on sibling mentorship. So we have trained a group of sibling mentors to provide guidance to sibling mentees. So again, I encourage you to check out our website or follow up with me, and I can share some of those resources with you. So, Carrie, any last words?
Oh, hello. I had to unmute myself, sorry. Just, I just wanted to thank Emily for a great facilitation today, and the panelists, Hillary and Monica and Joe. Your stories are just so powerful. I love listening to them. And as a professional, I just learned so much. So we are here as a resource for you. Please reach out. You have any questions. We hope you join us again in the future. This was recorded, so we will have a recording up.
Carrie, can I plug one of the ARCS programs really quickly before we all go?
Sure.
That Carrie's the director of, actually, because siblings, a lot of times what we are lacking is our mothers or fathers kind of learned everything and like know how to navigate the systems and know how to, some of the stuff you're talking about, Amy, some of it, sure, a lawyer has to help with, but a lot of it is like systems navigation stuff that really you just need an experienced professional, not necessarily to pay a lawyer $500 an hour or something, right? So the ARC of Massachusetts has the support brokers program that Carrie's the director of, and it's a fee for service program, but it is nothing like, it's not attorney's fees. So, from a cost standpoint, it's like having somebody that can advocate, can kind of help you navigate the service system. So I just think it's a really great resource for people. I just wanted to plug it for you, Carrie.
Oh, thank you, Hillary. Yes. So we do get a lot of calls from adult siblings who's, the mom, it's mostly the mom, had everything all set, and then all of a sudden she's no longer, and they're moving in from out of state, understanding all the jargon, support brokers, we do a lot with helping adult siblings, and we also do a lot with future planning. So feel free to reach out to us, and we can talk. So thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.